Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session. It's our second day. I'm excited. It's a full day of the symposium. The keynote, the discussant, the questions, moderation and answers, and the discussion groups yesterday really ignited my imagination, and I think it did the same to those who were here yesterday. I thought Sheila was amazing. I would also like to acknowledge all those who attended yesterday, asked questions, moderated, and supported the session. I would like to acknowledge my colleagues, beginning with David, who is helping us with the technology here, Lisa, who is also helping coordinate the session, Mike and George. Thank you so much for the work done yesterday. And a very warm welcome to those of you who are joining us today. Now, a special welcome to those of us who we can't see. For us who are in person, we have about the same group of participants online. A very warm welcome to you this morning. The link to the questions when we come to the question and answer period is on the landing page here, and we'll post it again at about just before the question. So feel free to post your question on there, and we'll read it to the audience if you're online. So we will begin with the land acknowledgement. And before I read the land acknowledgement, I would like to say a few words about the land acknowledgement itself. And the few words I'm going to say, I took them verbatim from the City of London website at their land acknowledgement website. So the land acknowledgement is a first step towards reconciliation. Awareness means nothing without action. It's important that everyone takes the necessary steps towards decolonizing practices. We encourage everyone to be informed about the traditional lands, treaties, history, cultures of the indigenous people local to their region. Then I'll do the Western land acknowledgement, recognizing that we all come from different institutions. Some people come from different cities, and some people come from different provinces here today. So you will, as you listen to the Western land acknowledgement, find a moment to also acknowledge those lands where you are located. So I'll use the we. We acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and the Changton nations, on the lands connected with the land and township, the Sombra Treaties of 1796, and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. With this, we respect the long-standing relationship that indigenous nations have to this land, as they are the original caretakers. We also acknowledge historical and ongoing injustices that indigenous peoples, the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit endure in Canada. And we accept responsibilities as a public institution to contribute toward revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing respectful relationships with indigenous communities through our teaching, our research, and our community service. So I'll give you a minute for those who come from different lands to pause and acknowledge those lands. In the different locations and institutions. So again, thank you so much for joining this morning. I am very excited to introduce our speaker for this morning. So our speaker is Mark Daley. He is the Chief AI Officer at Western University and a full professor in many departments. The Department of Computer Science, with cross appointments with 5 other departments, including the Rotman Institute of Philosophy, the Western Institute for Neuroscience. He's also a faculty affiliate of the Toronto's Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence. Now, Mark has previously served as our Vice President Research at the Canadian Institute of Advanced Research, CIFAR. and the Chief Digital Information Officer, Special Advisor to the President, and Associate Vice President, Research at Western. That's what I was referring to as our Vice President Research. So he served as Vice President at 2 different locations. Mark is the past chair of the Computer Ontario, and serves on a number of other boards. Now, I did check his publications online, and I did see at one of the sites 177 publications. I did also take a peek at his social media, and I would like to add a few words from his social media. Now, he is an AI advocate, a researcher, and an implementer. And he has things that he sweats for. I will let him talk about what he sweats for. So today, and here I quote ChatGPT, as we gather to delve into the intricacies of AI education, there could be no more fitting guide than Mark Daley. It said Mr. Mark Daley, but Professor Mark Daley. Without further ado, please join me in extending a warm welcome to our esteemed keynote speaker, Professor Mark Daley.
Before we can talk in detail about AI, I need to be really clear about what I mean today when I say AI. Because AI and machine learning have been with all of us for our entire lives in various different ways, but we've all had the experience of Amazon saying, oh, you might want to buy this product, or Netflix recommending a show. That's all machine learning. So machine learning and AI are not new, but what feels different the last couple of years is progress in generative AI. And defining generative AI is actually tricky. This is not the world's greatest definition. This comes from a committee I chaired for the Government of Canada on the use of AI, and a room full of experts argued for about 4 hours about how to define, right, you're all laughing. This isn't perfect, but the number of human hours that went into it have made it very important to me. So close enough for us. The first feature is that the system is straightforward to use. You don't need to read a user's manual. You don't need to go on a training boot camp. You can just use it right out of the box. It intrinsically enables iterative development. If you've used a chatbot, you do not have to accept the answer you get to your first query. You can go back and say, let's workshop paragraph 2. I don't like it. It makes available a huge amount of information that's been extracted from a huge corpus. And probably most saliently for educators, it has the potential to produce output that a non-expert or even an expert might mistake for being human-generated. So what's happening here at this moment in time? This is my favorite slide to show the Ivy Biz School kids. ChatGPT, when using GPT-4, generated pitches. So these were not entirely generated by the AI. These were human AI collaborations. Were judged by senior venture capitalists at 3 times more likely to be funded than fully human-generated pitches. And the biz school kids get their hackles up and say, I'm smarter than a machine. And I have to tell them, okay, well, do you want to feel smart or do you want the money? Because according to the people who have the money, you will be 3 times, not 30%, 3 times more effective if you become a cyborg. So the machine's not replacing you, but it's augmenting you, and it's probably good at things that you're not, and we'll get back to that. For educators, this is an important one because we deal with youth, Gen Z and Gen Alpha now. Many Gen Z employees feel that ChatGPT is a better mentor than their boss. And when I talk to managers and execs, none of them are surprised by this, because they all recognize, I would love to be able to spend a week with my report, Sarah, talking about her aspirations because she's fantastic and I want her to succeed, but I'm already working 80-hour weeks. There just isn't time for that. Whereas when you go to ChatGPT and say, hey, can I talk about my career aspirations? It will say, please talk to me. You're the most fascinating human ever to live. And it turns out people like that. And also, on a more practical note, it knows about more careers than any one human ever could. So it has that availability as well as knowledge base that human mentors don't necessarily. It's even good at football. DeepMind partnered with a professional football club in the UK and came up with a neural net that will create strategies for corner kicks. And as judged by human players and other human coaches, the AI strategies for corner kicks were overwhelmingly preferred over human-generated strategies. Some of you may have seen a tech demo from OpenAI a couple of months ago, a product called Sora, which is a text-to-video neural network. So you type in what you want to see, and it creates a video clip for you. The immediate response from the media was, oh no, Hollywood's dead. You know, forget Netflix, you're just going to type in, I want to watch Gary Oldman in a spy thriller, but it can't be slow horses. And it'll say, sure, do you want to be a character in the show? We can do a self-insert fanfic here. And so all of that is coming at some point in the future. How much we'll actually want that is a different conversation. Because if everyone's got their own independent media, what are you going to talk about on the water cooler? So there's lots to unpack there. But that's actually not even the lead. The lead got buried. Jim Fan, who's a senior research scientist at NVIDIA, recognized immediately what he was looking at. So when we go back and look at this picture, if you watch the video on YouTube, I just know better than to try to do videos and presentations, PDF only. Look at the reflections in the puddle. The reflections are perfect. If the reflections weren't perfect, your eyes and your brain would immediately tell you this is not a real picture. So that neural net has an internal approximate model of the physics of light. When she steps in a puddle, it ripples in a believable way. So it also has a model of fluid mechanics, approximate Navier-Stokes equations built right in. When she walks, totally believable. So it also has a model of the kinematics of human motion. And when she interacts with other people, also believable, which means it has an internal model of human behavior. So Jim looks at this and says, this isn't just a video generator, this is an approximate whole world simulator. And it's not perfect, it makes mistakes, but it does pretty well. And this approximate whole world simulator fits in about 80 gigabytes of floating point numbers. That's enough that your laptop hard drive could comfortably store the whole thing. And if you told pretty much anyone, including computer scientists, 5 years ago, you can have an approximate whole world simulator in 80 gigabytes, we would have said you're nuts. And yet we now live in the timeline where there's an existence proof for that statement. How many people here have used a chatbot? I'm sorry, I can't see the folks online. Okay, so if you've used a chatbot, you have interacted with the productized version of a large language model. Early language models had a problem with memory. My kids tell me I have the same problem. Things that are older in the conversation are less likely to be attended to. So you fill up the memory of the language model, and the things fresh in the memory are easier for it to attend to than the things further back. That problem has been largely solved now with better training approaches and better architectures, but it's still something we test for, doing a needle in a haystack test, where you put something in, you fill the context with a whole bunch of stuff, and then put one fact that you want it to see if it can pull that out. Claude 3 Opus is the latest frontier model from Anthropic. It's a couple months old now, and you can see from that big green square there that it passed its needle in a haystack test, no problem. But it did something that no previous LLM had ever done. During one of the tests, it correctly answered the question, but then unprompted added a tag on. It said, but like, by the way, you gave me like 10 textbooks worth of software documentation, and there's one sentence in there about pizza toppings, and you asked me about that sentence. That's totally absurd unless you're testing me. Are you testing me? Right, wow. If a 6-year-old did that in a lab school, the clinical psychologist evaluating them would say, evidence of precocious metacognition, check mark. It feels weird to talk about metacognition when we're talking about a machine and not a human, but I don't know what other language to use for a metacognitive observation like that. And of course, on the topic of anthropomorphizing things, OpenAI had a release event a couple of weeks ago for GPT-4 Omni, where they showed that this next generation of deep neural network is not just a language model. It actually takes vision, so video and images and audio, as first-class citizens. So you can put text in, but you can also put other modalities in, and it processes those. And they showed some really cool demos, and they had a voice that sounded a lot like a certain famous actress. And Sam Altman, the CEO, had actually conditioned all of this with the name of the movie that that actress appeared in, and that movie will come back in the talk today. And I thought it was a really, really interesting characterization, because I read that movie as a criticism of exactly this, and OpenAI just jumped right into the criticism. This is a chart, and Tom, I know you hate this chart. You have some good reasons to hate it, but the general principle holds, of various different tasks. And you can see that when I started in grad school, machines were not very good at tasks that we think of as being uniquely human. You don't need to take pictures. This is in Time magazine. You can get it on the website. There was a whole long list of things that were our domain. Computers could kind of do a little bit of handwriting recognition in certain controlled circumstances, and they could do a little bit of voice recognition, but they could not do next paragraph completion, where I give you a paragraph of text and say, write the next paragraph. That is a really difficult test. It requires synthetic thinking, it requires analytic thinking. You have to read the first paragraph, you have to comprehend it, you have to know something about the subject matter in that paragraph, you have to be able to match the tone and style. So there's a lot going on there. And in 2019, computers were 0% as good as humans at doing that task. By 2022, they were better than most of our undergrads. And so pick your favorite human topic, or human-owned topic here, and look at the lines. And what you see is there's more and more of these lines going from computers can't do this to now they do it better than an average human, and they're getting closer and closer together. I'm not saying that's going to continue forever, but for this moment in time, there are a lot of things that our anthropocentrism has told us this is ours. Humans do X, machines do Y, that now machines do, and do better than an average human. X-axis here is time, Y-axis is your favorite technology. It could be the number of printing presses in Europe, it could be the number of mobile phones owned by a human on planet Earth. Successful technologies historically have a period of exponential uptake and exponential improvement. And the problem with being where we are right now with AI is, as humans, we condition tomorrow on today. My best model for what tomorrow is going to look like is it's going to look a lot like today. And we have that Bayesian model of the world because it usually works. But it means that we look retrospectively and project out to the future. And where it fails is in the face of exponential change. Because if you turn around and look prospectively, there's a brick wall there. And anyone, including me, who tells you, I know what's on the other side of the brick wall, invest in Bitcoin, you should not believe. I don't know what's on the other side of the brick wall either. Maybe nothing. Maybe the surprise is this all just sort of fizzles out. But also, maybe radical transformation. And we should prepare for multiple possible futures. So what is the future of being a student? We all care about students, or we wouldn't be in this room. We believe education is important. This is Bill Gates at a Global Silicon Valley Summit at ASU over a year ago. So that 18 months there is now down to 4 months, and we're done. AI will be a better tutor than any human. I don't agree. I think there are things human tutors and human instructors can do that AI can't, but there are a lot of things that AI can do really well, and I'll show you some examples later on. This is from a paper by a Wharton Business School prof, Ethan Mollick, and his colleagues, where they partnered with the Boston Consulting Group and took a junior cohort of, here are the fresh grad consultants and, It's business consulting, so they haze the consultants for 4 months, make them do case studies, and then the senior partners evaluate how they did. And they evaluate them really tough, because this is business consulting and we got to be tough. And that blue distribution there is the control group who were treated the way they always treat their junior consultants. And the mean mark was right about 4 out of 8. And that's what they expect. The green cohort were given a free subscription to ChatGPT Pro and told, you can use this thing if you want. That's it, no other instruction. The red group were given a boot camp. Here's how to use generative AI, and you should use it when you're completing your case studies. So the first thing you notice is the red group did a little bit better than the green group, but not much. Just having access to the technology made a bigger difference than having some training on it. So this is different than most of the types of technologies we've ever seen before. But moreover, I'm looking at that and thinking, do I want to be 2 points more effective on an 8-point scale as judged by experts, our senior consultants, basically for free, just by adopting a technology? And most people would look at that and say yes, except for, I always feel sad for this little red bump over here. They even had the boot camp. Right? They had every opportunity, and it's still 1.5. So it can't fix everything. But good news, if you suck at your job, generative AI will make you 43% more effective as long as your job is business consulting. Even if you're in the top half of junior consultants, though, it still makes you 17% better as judged by the senior consultants. And I'll take a free 17% improvement, especially if the 17% of the stuff that I'm outsourcing is things I don't really want to do anyways, but have to do. I spend a lot of time talking with our undergrad students. They're our #1 stakeholder. When I look at our income statement, there's no ambiguity there, and I like chatting with undergrad students. I show this example, but they already know this, so they're like, yeah, that's not new. I took course outline from one of our second-year electrical engineering courses. Electric circuits, core course, hard, boring. No one gets up at 8 o'clock in the morning and thinks, oh boy, circuit analysis. But you need this to be an electrical engineer. And so I dumped that into ChatGPT Pro and said, I'm a bad person. I haven't been to class in ever. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. My final is tomorrow. This is the class, help. And it did a really good job of triaging. So it understood, okay, your exam is in a few hours, so we're not going to teach you the whole course. It read the course outline, saw what was in the class, had enough internal knowledge in the model of electrical engineering and also how professors write exams that it was able to produce a really good, here are things you need to study to get the most possible number of part marks on your exam, and maybe you'll pass. And I said, great, let's dive in, but go slow, because obviously I'm not the world's greatest student, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. And it did a great job. So it starts off here talking about phasers with this nice Ferris wheel analogy. So it picked up, okay, this guy's kind of dumb, so I'm going to go slow. And it eases me into the mathematics. And I went back and forth for about 20 turns with it. And it did a really good job. And I couldn't help but thinking as a prof that probably if a student called me at 2 o'clock in the morning, I would be less charitable than the chatbot was, and probably less helpful too. And the chatbot, not once did it judge me. It didn't say, Mark Daley, you should have gone to class. I'm so disappointed in you. It just rolled up its sleeves and helped me. So it was available. It was an educational tutor available to me when I really didn't have access to anything else. But on the topic of accessibility, at Western, more than 10% of our undergraduate student cohort do not speak English as a first language. So partway through my tutor session, I asked ChatGPT, "Nihongo ga wakarimasu ka?" And it said, yeah, sure, and just immediately switched into tutoring me in Japanese fluently. And it can do this for about 40 languages. Well, it'll tell you about 40 languages. It can actually do more than that, but it's less fluent in the other languages. But as a student, I now have access to that knowledge in my native language, which reduces my cognitive load. When I'm trying to read a math paper in French or German, there's just no culture of translating a lot of the older literature. It doubles my cognitive load. Like I lose 50 IQ points because I'm struggling with a language I'm not fluent in, trying to access something difficult. And this isn't Google Translate. Google Translate is a one-off. It's transactional. I put it in, press translate, I get the translation. Here, I can have a dialogue with the knowledge. I get to ask follow-up questions. I'm like, I didn't really understand step 3. Can we break that down? And it can continue to tutor me in a language that feels like home to me. Another example I like to show students. Here I am pretending so this is this is Claude 3, the one that realized it was being tested. So I asked Claude 3 Opus, I'm a student, I'm applying for a master's degree in philosophy. Can you assume the role of a really grumpy, judgy philosophy prof and give me feedback on telling it to assume a role is really helpful. It gives it tons of context and you get a much better output. And it gave me great feedback. And it ended its feedback with, by the way, Mark, if you're planning on submitting this document, save yourself the application fee, because there's just no way you're getting into the program. But do you want me to help you fix it? And I said, sure. So then, 20 minutes of my life went by, and I went back and forth with the AI, and I learned about whole subfields of philosophy that I didn't even know existed. And if I'd actually been creating a statement, it would be way better than what I had originally written. So if you are a student from a privileged socioeconomic stratum, this really doesn't change your life that much because you have access to human mentors who will do this for you. Your social network, your parents' social networks, they'll know a philosophy professor or an admissions officer. And so you'll be able to get that one-on-one tutoring. But if you come from a non-privileged stratum, you do not have a privileged network, this isn't as good as having a human mentor, but it is a lot better than having absolutely nothing. This is my favorite slide in the whole talk because it's data. I've been giving you anecdotes and opinions. Here I have data. What we have here is a plot of the level of play of the game of Go. This is professional Go players at the absolute top, and what you see is from 1950 to the mid-2010s, the level of play is stagnant. There's some variance, and there's a few outliers in there, but really, we felt that we as humans had solved the game of Go. We know how to play it, we know the major strategies, we know how to train young people to be really good Go players. We've got this. And then in 2016, DeepMind's AlphaGo beat the world's best human Go player. That was the first time that had happened. Between 2016 and 2018, most of the top professional Go players in the world started training against AI. And look what happens. It's really important for me to emphasize this chart is human versus human play at the very top level of Go. These are professional Go players. This is not machines playing humans. This is not humans outsourcing their play to machine. This is humans playing humans unaided, but they were aided in training with an AI tutor. And what you see is that after 70 years of stagnation, the level of play in Go starts to go up again because we are using AI tutors. Now, Go is not representative of the entire world, unless you're a Go player, and then you'll say, actually, Mark, no, you're wrong. Go is like life. But because it's an abstract strategy game, it's really easy for me to quantify things like level of play. So this doesn't necessarily generalize to every area of human endeavor, but at least in this one, we now have concrete, statistically valid evidence that training with an AI can make you as a human better, even if you are already at the top of a particular skill. You are amongst the most elite. Training against the AI makes you better than we thought humans ever could get. So what does that mean for us as teachers? One of the responses I have seen is, oh, this isn't going to affect teaching. It's going to affect everything else, but that magenta line, teaching is just going to stay exactly the same. Students are going to love showing up and listening to me lecture at the front of the room like I'm doing right now. This skill I'm demonstrating right now is a time-limited skill. Students will not be standing for this when they have an AI tutor. Here I asked Claude 3, assume the role of an Assyriologist, which it does. You can see the start of its response, clears throat and adopts a professorial tone. So it even has fun with me. give me a course outline for a course on Hurrian. Why Hurrian? Because it's obscure. Hurrian is a language that was spoken in the ancient Near East. It is very poorly attested, not even fully understood. There's really one good reference grammar, and as far as I know, there's only ever been one course taught on it at the University of Chicago 15 years ago, and the website's long gone. So, really obscure. Give me a course outline for Hurrian. And it gives me a course outline, and it looks good. You know, it's got here are your learning objectives, and here I'm going to break it down into 12 weeks. And of course, I don't know anything about Hurrian, so I don't know if this is any good or not, but I sent it to my friend, Emily, who is an Assyriologist, and she said, I could teach this. There's a couple things I'd change, but those are matters of sort of personal style. But I could just teach this right off the page, and it's the right reference grammar. That's the one I would use. And so this is a really powerful mechanism for helping us frame knowledge, even when we are asked to step outside of our own areas of specialty. If I had to teach a course on Hurrian, now I would know what I need to do myself before I sit down with the students. Works for broad scholarship, too. So this is a Reddit post from a musicology PhD who did their dissertation on an obscure German opera, connecting it to original source material for the opera from 18th century India. And they spent 3 years going through, they estimated about 10,000 documents and archives to find the original source material and make the connections. And then they were playing with Google Gemini, that's Google's LLM, and thought, I'm going to see if it could have helped me. Like if Gemini had existed when I did my PhD, could that have accelerated my research? And basically with the single prompt, it didn't accelerate, it did the whole research. It's like, oh, it's this source document and this source document that you should connect to, and that was what he found in his PhD thesis. And so his initial response was, oh no, what is my future as a researcher? But that was immediately felt like, wait a minute, I didn't become a musicologist because I'm interested in spending my whole life in archives, even though archives are fun. I became a musicologist because I want to study the evolution of this human art form and how that interacts with society. And now I can do that faster. And the sort of really practical take-home message here is, even though you will see people probably correctly say Gemini is not as good at reasoning as GPT-4 and Claude, it is amazing if you have a query involving books, because it was trained on the whole Google Books corpus, and the Google Books corpus is huge, and it is a good approximation of sort of everything ever published by humans, at least in a subset of languages. And so if you have a query about books, Gemini is the right one to use. On the topic of books and art, this is Rikudan. She's a Japanese author who wrote a book about an AI-controlled prison in central Tokyo in the near future. She recently won Japan's highest award for young up-and-coming authors, and when she accepted the award, she mentioned, by the way, I co-wrote my book with ChatGPT. Right, and Twitter went nuts, exactly what you would expect. There were people saying, she is a genius, she's a trailblazer, this is the future of literature, and there were other people saying, if you didn't burn the carbon and grind it into ink yourself to use your quill pen on, it isn't literature. So you get a full spectrum of reactions, but one of the prize committee members came forward and said, we knew, she disclosed that she used AI in writing this, and we don't care because this is great literature. We also don't disqualify typewriter users. So what does this mean for educators? Don't spend too much time looking at the map, and you don't need to take a picture of this. This is actually an example of what not to be thinking about. There is and someone's still taking a picture. No. there are a million companies, you could also say grifters, some of them, looking to sell you, we've cracked AI for education, buy our product. We are at a moment in time, remember that exponential change curve? Right. Buying any specific product targeted to one vertical is a bad idea at this moment in time, because most of these products are very thin veneer around a foundation model, so GPT-4 or Gemini, and those foundation models are where you should be spending your time. Learn to work with a general purpose chatbot. Over time, Some of these products will actually become viable and worthwhile as independent products, but Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, about a month ago on a podcast was asked, so when your next big model comes out, what's going to happen to these companies that you might disrupt? He said, like, what do you mean might? I'm going to steamroll 98% of my customers. I mean, that's a really interesting thing for a CEO to say, very arrogant, but he's probably not wrong. And so investing too much time in an expensive product that is going to get steamrolled by the general purpose technology is probably not a great use of your time. Your time would be much better spent working with a general purpose chatbot and figuring out how it works for your use cases. So, have to talk about AI detectors. First, a little story. We did a survey with some colleagues here in the Faculty of Education of our instructors and students on generative AI. And one of the questions we asked our students was, how do you feel about being allowed to use generative AI in the completion of your course requirements? One of the most overwhelmingly positive answers on the survey. Students loved that. Absolutely, we're going to have to use this anyway, so we should be learning to use it. We're going to be competing against people who know how to use it. All of that stuff, and agree with all of that. We also asked a question, how do you feel about your instructors using AI to evaluate you? Can you guess what the answer was? Overwhelmingly the most negative valence response on the entire survey, with write-in comments along the lines of, you are a morally bad human being for even answering this, and I filtered that into nicer language. So students viscerally felt disgust. No, I want to be judged by a jury of my peers, and a machine isn't my peer. So there's an interesting disconnect there, and it's made even more interesting by a growing body of literature showing that if you employ these things correctly, and the word correctly is doing a lot of work. There are guidelines, there's a process to do this right, and if you don't do it right, you can really get things wrong. But if you do it right, generative AI that we have today off the shelf is less biased, more accurate, and more replicable, higher inter-rater reliability than average human instructors. So if students actually want the best possible feedback, they should be saying, yes, give me the AI. So there's an education piece there. AI detectors. There are many of us who teach courses where the primary means of evaluation has always been a couple of essays, because essays required integrative thinking, and there was just no other really good way to test what I was trying to test. And so all of a sudden having a technology that can't produce a great essay, but can produce, with a little bit of effort, a B- essay, defeats your evaluation. And you have two choices. You can either sort of like revisit your pedagogy and your means of evaluation, or you can look for a magic rock that will detect the evil thing that's changing your life, and then you don't have to do all the work of self-examination and developing a new pedagogy. And so, shockingly, a whole bunch of companies sprung up selling magic rocks. This rock will turn green if your student used AI. You just run it over the paper, and people rushed to buy the magic rocks because it's an attractive fiction. I'm a theoretical computer scientist. I can tell you with mathematical certainty that detecting AI-generated text with certainty in all cases is provably mathematically impossible. It's equivalent to the halting problem for Turing machines that Alan Turing showed was undecidable in the 1930s. So these companies aren't just selling you snake oil, they're selling you like mathematically provably impossible snake oil, and people are still buying it, even though Turnitin's AI detector, someone fed in the US Declaration of Independence, and it said 96.21% AI generated in the 18th century, evidence of time travel, or Turnitin's lying to you. So my plea to you if you're an educator is don't use these tools. They don't work. They cannot ever work, and you will eventually accuse an innocent student of using AI when they didn't, and think about what that experience is going to be like for them. Oops. Skipped a bunch of slides there. Okay, so bringing it all back together. Teachers and students have something in common. We're all humans. So what's the future of being human if this is true? So I can't see through the brick wall any more than anyone else can. But that's why we don't go to fortune tellers to predict the future. We use tools like strategic foresight, where we say, okay, I don't know what the future is going to be, but I can imagine a portfolio of possible futures and reason about that. And I don't know which one's going to come true, but I can be ready for all of those. And the two most likely futures at this moment in time are what we've got now, which is already disruptive and exciting, is kind of going to be it for a while. We're going to have to wait for a new big theoretical breakthrough, which may or may not come in our lifetimes, but things are just going to kind of settle down, the hype will die down, and we'll inhabit a world where we have these kind of neat assistants that can help us with a lot of things, but they're not going to get any better. There is another world in which this chart, as we extend it over to, let's go to 2028, more and more of those vertical lines start appearing. More and more of the things that we used to think of as uniquely the domain of humans are going to be done better by machines. Poetry, right? 30 years ago, no one except science fiction authors were talking about machines writing poetry. Now, we have multiple studies in the literature where professors of poetry judged GPT-4's poems not just better than the average undergrads, but specifically on the criterion of creativity, GPT-4 was judged as more creative than 99% of undergraduate poets, right? And we don't think of machines as being creative, but we asked creatives to judge creativity. And so, again, these things that we think uniquely us, machines doing them. And this is the number one question I get from students. The number one question is not, how do I build my own AI? I get that from some engineers and computer scientists. It's not, how do I do a startup, like that big page of how do I get in on the grift? The number one question I get is, what does this mean for me as a human? Because I live in a Western society where many of us identify our core identity with our vocation. And I'm a student in a system where I've been told since middle school, you are a bag of skills. And we do this at the university for sure. Take this course and this course, and here are the learning outcomes, and you tick all these boxes, and now you can go and be an investment banker because you acquired a bag of skills. Nothing else. It's, here are the skills you acquired, you can go and do the thing. And so students start thinking of themselves as a bag of skills, and like, oh no, wait, but the machine's got a bigger bag of skills. What does that mean for me? And when we look at which of those two futures, the sort of stagnation future versus there's going to be continued change future, this is a plot of log perplexity. So perplexity is a measure of how good the output from a large language model is. It's not a perfect measure, it's got problems, but it lets me use a single number. And you can see over time, especially since 2017, which is when the transformer was invented, we've got pretty much a straight line fit in terms of log perplexity. So a straight line on a log plot means we are seeing exponential improvement. So at this moment in time, these things are continuing to improve exponentially, which means more and more competence. They will be able to do more and more skills that we used to think were human. That line can't continue forever. It will plateau at some point. But my best guess as a technologist is we've got another 2 or 3 years of this level of improvement before we start to hit real scaling laws just based on the amount of compute power needed. Now, we might have breakthroughs that allow us to go further and faster, but even if nothing really changes, if there's no big theoretical breakthroughs, I think we've got another 2 or 3 years of increasingly powerful machines. So that means increasingly anxious students. The skill, all of my skills, what am I going to do? Well, the first thing I tell our undergrads is, great news. You are at a university that has Faculty of Arts and Humanities. And there are people over there who work in intellectual traditions, 1,000 years old, where we ask, thousands in some case, where we ask questions like, what does it mean to be a good human? What does it mean to live a good life, to live a worthwhile life? And not every philosopher who ever lived has said, being a good human means getting a big bag of skills and using those skills every day. There are other ways to live and other things to live for. And so there's opportunities to have those conversations with the students. And so let's just go back and look at this chart here. You can look at that, and the mindset the students are coming out with is fear that the machine can do things that used to be just for me. But when you ask the students, like, why are you here? What do you really want out of your life? No undergrad student has ever told me, well, I want to be the best accountant in Southwestern Ontario. I want to be amazing with balance sheets and income statements. They're all here because they want to have an impact on the world. They want to do something that they think is worthwhile. They have an idea about solving wealth inequality. They want to work on climate change. And so if you rotate your worldview 90 degrees and start thinking about, like, what's the impact I want to have? This isn't scary anymore. What this says is, if I've got an amazing idea for doing something about social inequality right here in my city, and I want to start a not-for-profit, I don't have to hire an accountant because I have accounting GPT to help me. I don't want to learn about balance sheets. I'll outsource that to the machine. I don't need to hire a VP of strategic marketing on day one because I can get strategic marketing from ChatGPT. It's not going to be as good as an expert human, but it's a lot better than me just guessing and not knowing. And so my personal agency as a human is 5 to 10 times what it was 5 years ago if I choose to adopt the technology. But there's also a deeper question here. What if this chart actually does continue? What if we have another major theoretical breakthrough in the efficiency of these models, and we end up in a world where actually any cognitive task you can do as a human, the machine can do better? Anyone, pick one, machines do that better than people. What does that mean? That means what I keep for myself versus what I outsource is a choice. It's a values and ethics decision. It's got nothing to do with technology. It is 100% about values. And this is so important for us as educators, because our students are looking to us for, like, how should I use this thing? What is good and ethical use? Like, if you use ChatGPT to complete your English Composition 101 assignment, you've cheated yourself. You're there to learn how to write sentences and paragraphs and construct those things. And if you outsource that to a machine, you're losing. But if you use the machine to critique your philosophy essay, and it gives you critique where you discover whole new areas and arguments that, like, now you're learning. You're using it pro-socially. I also can't ruin Western's reputation with these vendors. So what do? My co-pilot in Outlook, I say, please politely say, I'm not the CIO anymore. And it creates this nice 3-paragraph business letter, and it has all of my previous emails, so it knows that particular vendor has kids who are the same age as my kids, and it puts a sentence in there about that. I make a couple of changes and press go, and I don't feel bad about doing that. But if my partner sent me a personal email about one of our kids, and I went and pressed Copilot, right, everyone's grossed out now. They're like, oh, you're a morally bad person, Mark. It's the exact same use case. I'm using generative AI to reply to an email. And in one case, you're like, okay, that's an acceptable life hack given the circumstances and constraints you're under. Or maybe you don't. But in the other case, we sort of all agree that that is, like, repugnant that you even suggested that. So we're already in a world where some cognitive tasks can be outsourced to a machine. But that doesn't mean they should be. And it's up to us as educators. That's the most important conversation we can have with students about generative AI, is be mindful about when and where you're using it, about what you're outsourcing to it. Do you want to inhabit a life where you just outsource everything to the machine and you sit on a sofa and that's it? Like, maybe that's a thing that could happen, but is that a good life? Is that the life you want to have for yourself? And those aren't technology decisions, so I'm actually not the right person to give advice on that. Those are humanistic, value, and ethics-based decisions. So as an educator, this is the source of my greatest optimism. Not that I think everyone should play Go, but that we have data at scale that humans at the absolute peak of performance, what we thought was the peak of human performance, when taking an AI tutor, can improve their performance as humans. And so I think that generalizes. I don't think it generalizes to everything humans do, but I think there's a lot of fields of study where this is probably true. And there's just sort of a green field of opportunity for us to do this now. So we can employ this technology in a pro-social way that allows us to educate people at a scale we couldn't previously. But with that comes a duty to educate them on how to use it responsibly and to understand human agency and what it means for them. I'm going to end with a super practical piece of advice. This is from Ethan Mollick, who had the study earlier on in the talk. If you haven't played with a chatbot yet, do it. There's literature saying 10 hours is the magic number. So give yourself 10 hours, not all at once. 10 hours with Microsoft Copilot would be unbearable. Over a period of 2 or 3 weeks, take the 5 things you hate most about your job and try to get the AI to do them. It will not be able to do all 5, but it may be able to help you with 1 or 2. And you'll probably be surprised the ones it can help you with, because this is very different than most software. It violates your expectations. The affordances it offers are totally different than what you expect from software. So try that. And in that process of experimenting, you're going to start to develop an intuition for, what is this technology good at and what is it not good at? And at the end of it, you might have 1 or 2 things that now improve your quality of life because you hate doing those things, and now you've got a buddy to help you do those things. Any questions?
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation this morning. We're going to be asking questions of Professor Mark Daley of his talk, but before we do that, we do have a respondent to his talk who is going to discuss the ideas, and then we'll do the Q&A. So at the moment, I would like to invite Dr. Mike Kacheba to respond to the talk by Professor Mark.
Thank you. Let me start by saying, how do you respond to this? Like, it's just absolutely positively mind-blowing. It makes, everything that we're doing here, it's just like so thought-provoking. And it makes us really have to kind of take some time to pause. I was debating pulling out ChatGPT and transcribing everything and asking ChatGPT to provide a response to Mark, because it seemed like the only appropriate and suitable way of doing it, but I decided to try and take it on myself. I think maybe the best way of trying to frame this is in the context of some of the things that came out of our discussion yesterday, because there's a few key points, and I think those key points are probably going to drive some of the questions that are going to be coming up after this. One of the things that was kind of a recurring theme in the questions yesterday was speed, and the rate at which all of this stuff is happening. If we take a look at the adoption of, I guess, disruptive technologies, and I think calling what we've just seen here a disruptive technology is probably an understatement. But the adoption of those other disruptive technologies, whether you're looking at cell phones or computers or the printing press, were on timescales of years or decades in the making. And this is on the timescale of weeks and months. And if the rate at which this stuff is evolving and growing is happening at the exponential rates, those time periods are going to be getting less and less. So one thing to think about is, how can we take the time to be able to digest, assimilate, and adapt to this? Can we? And it's a very interesting and I think challenging question, because Mark did the really good job of saying, okay, well, here's why we shouldn't be scared by this. But I don't know about you, I'm still just a little scared, at least, by some of these things. How many people here are still a little nervous about this whole thing? Okay, quite a few hands going up. And so nothing against your reassurance, Mark, because you did a fabulous job of that. But the one question I had is that, well, when you're talking about how we can make an impact becomes, well, can I outsource that to ChatGPT? It's like, hey, this is what I know how to do. How can I make an impact in the world? Is that something we start outsourcing? As an interesting question. So how do we take the time to be able to adapt to these sorts of things? I think my answer to that is, well, we're all in this room together today, having these conversations. We're here thinking about it because we recognize that these are important issues, that these are life-changing issues. Am I not speaking to? Oh, everything's good? Okay, good. These are things that are changing our lives, changing the lives of our students, and how do we do something about this? And we're here today, so we're at least recognizing this and taking steps forward. And I think that's probably the key to all of this. Two other key points that I wanted to kind of tie in from our discussions yesterday. One was a question of equity. And so Mark raised the really good point that right now you have people that are quite privileged being able to have human tutors that can do all of these things and have been doing all these things right now. And this becomes an equalizer to people that are less privileged. But a point that was made yesterday that I think is worth us all thinking about is that there are people less privileged than those less privileged. That there are people where access to computers, internet, electrical infrastructure don't have even those privileges to be able to access and leverage this technology. And how do we do that in this world where there's going to be an increasing divide because of this technology? How do we try and provide that kind of equal access and access to these new technologically based tools to help with their education? So something that I think requires a lot of care and a lot of attention. Mark also brought up and raised the very good point about the dichotomy between students wanting to be able to leverage the tools but also not wanting to be evaluated by the tools. And that was a theme that was brought up yesterday, where students, when they were doing certain activities in the classroom, were kind of energized and thought this was cool until they found out, well, this is actually an AI. And they kind of felt violated or felt that their trust was kind of betrayed in that particular process. And you were talking about the anthropomization of the technologies is something that we need to worry about. There's this theory that is, I think, hotly contested and very controversial called the uncanny valley. I don't know how many of you have heard of this, but it's this theory that as you make something sufficiently more human, like whether it's a technology or a puppet or something else, people start to be able to relate and connect with it better, to a point at which it becomes very kind of repulsive because the non-human-like characteristics of it stand out, and this violation of trust becomes very important. And so there's this question of, well, where are we on this uncanny valley-like spectrum with respect to these kinds of technologies? I'm not sure if we're kind of over the hump going down into this valley of discontent, or if we're kind of pushing ourselves now out of the valley on the other side. It's hard to say, but that's also something that we need to worry about, where we want to be able to take a look at and engage some of these technologies, but is there going to be kind of a backlash against some of that or a rejection of some of that, whether that is well-informed or good-intentioned or not? Something else I think that's important for us to think about. But yeah, very excellent job with the talk, very thought-provoking. I don't want to take any more time away from everybody because I'm sure there's lots of questions out there. So again, thank you, Mark. That was fantastic. Gave me a lot to think about. So yeah, thank you.
Professor Mark Daley responds to your question. So if I can have you back here to respond to the questions. We'll start the question and answer period.
On AI, so their knowledge base is not in the system. Like, how do you imagine that playing out?
Excellent question. So the question is about intrinsic bias in the training data. And I actually think that the problem is even deeper than that. The training data itself, if you're trying to build a frontier model, you actually want as much breadth as possible. So
almost everything that humans have ever written, they are trying to get in there. So the training data does have a lot of, like, it knows really niche stuff about the community that my ancestors came and settled in Ontario. So there's a lot in there. What's the bigger problem is, under the umbrella of AI safety, we put guardrails on these things, and that's generally good. I don't want a chatbot that's spewing hate speech, but ChatGPT's guardrails, if I'm Sam Altman, I look at it and say, that is a safe, ethical AI because it has the same values that I do. But if my lived experience is in sub-Saharan Africa, Northern California values are not my values. And so there's actually an intrinsic element of cultural imperialism that we're calling AI safety, and we're selling it to the public, and the public is saying, oh yes, I want safe AI, and we're actually like doing a really dangerous thing. And the correct response to this is open source. Commoditize this, do this collectively, open up AI. Like when I'm being incredibly naive and dreaming really big, I imagine of a world where we can have sovereign AIs or even multilateral AIs. We inhabit a planet where more than half of humans have a mobile phone, a smartphone. That's not the whole world, but that's 54%. So the United Nations could pull together, the G7 could pull together and say, we're going to create a neutral AI that each country, each culture has access to this open source AI that they can fine tune, put their guardrails on it, it can reflect their values, and we'll make it accessible to the world. Because we agree education is a human right, and this is a really powerful tool for doing education. Those are policy decisions that we could make. That doesn't even cost that many billions of dollars. So I agree with you. I'm really concerned that we have a small handful of companies right now that are providing the frontier level services, and they get to dictate the domain of discourse that is accessible through that tool. And I think it's incumbent upon us as citizens and residents of a liberal democracy to look to those who govern us and say, no, I want to socialize this, at least in some ways. Thank you for asking that question.
I'm thinking about the example you gave with
Yes. Okay. So the question is about translation, and there's multiple parts. So the first part was, what do we do about low written resource languages like Canadian Indigenous languages that are underrepresented in these corpora? And the answer is, fortunately, with the technology we have now, we've moved beyond text, and audio and video are now equally privileged modalities as input. So it is now the case that gathering a sufficient corpus to be able to work in a language is just a matter of effort, going into a community, building the relationships, and I can't give the details because this is still in progress, but I'm working on an agreement with a company that does machine translation to add Anishinaabe to their set of languages that they can do translation for. And it's hard because it does not look like many of the other languages in the data set. The written corpus is small. It's present, but it's very small. And so how do you get a big enough audio corpus to do this? But it's all doable. And I think there's a moral imperative to do it because this is a new pillar. It's not going to solve language preservation, but it's a new pillar in language preservation because it's interactive. And languages that get used are languages that historically persist, unless they're status languages, but that's already English in our world, and French to a lesser extent, unfortunately. But that, so that is, again, that's doable if there are people who want to do it. The technology is neutral. It's what we choose to do with it. And so I'm optimistic about that. The broader question of being able to translate between languages, what we're finding as we train LLMs to be more and more competent on more and more languages is that languages have more similarity than difference. And so there was a really nice example with, it's not Gemini, but it was one of the Google LLMs where there was a particular Indian language in the north of India that was not in any of the training corpora. All they had to do was show a reference grammar to it, and it had enough from cognate languages and other branches of that language tree to be able to converse, not perfectly. Native speakers were like, I totally understand what it's saying, but like, I wouldn't have said it that way. So that's another mechanism for accessibility, is this sort of convergence of language. And there's really interesting philosophical implications there too, for like language of thought hypothesis, if you're a Jerry Fodor fan. But now I'm way above my pay grade as a computer scientist, so I'm going to be careful.
My question is, do you think English will be the only language that...
So the question is around the primacy of English in current frontier model AI. So that is absolutely true, because the training corpora are massively overweighted towards English, because the primary training sets are sort of the whole internet. So the language distribution resembles the language distribution of the internet, and all the scientific literature, which once again is overwhelmingly English. So it is seen more English than anything else. It is better in English. Two things to consider. The first is, if you look at the difference of GPT 3.5, which is 2 generations old, and GPT 4.0, and how well they are able to communicate in non-English languages, it's like a couple orders of magnitude difference. So as the models get smarter and bigger, they get better at communicating in non-English languages, but English is still definitely a privileged reference frame. The other approach is there are now a number of open source models from China that were trained with Mandarin first as the primary language. And I don't speak Mandarin, so I can't judge them, but colleagues who do say, yeah, they're very competent. They're equally competent in English. So this now actually becomes a matter of choice in how we train them to ensure that there is a breadth of literature from every language that we want them to be able to communicate in. So there's two forces moving towards it. One is more mindfulness of what goes into the training data, and the other is, as the machines get more capable, they get better at speaking in sort of their second language. But it's a really good point. Question there, and then at the back. Okay, so the question is, what does the classroom of the future look like, and how does one prepare for it? So I'm going to speak to higher ed, because that's where we're at first, because that's what I know. People look at Oxford as a really good model of an undergraduate education, and one of the reasons why Oxford is such a fantastic experience for undergrads is the tutorial model. So if you're an undergrad at Oxford, you get an hour a week with an Oxford professor who's one-on-one tutoring you, giving you direct feedback, giving you assignments, and we can't do that at a state school like Western because we don't have enough faculty and we have too many students, so we can't scale that. But we can get, and that's ideal, but we can't do the ideal. But using technology, we can scale a proxy. We could give every student an AI tutor that's not as good as a human tutor, but it's better than nothing, and it will learn them, learn their preferences, know what their strengths are, know what their weaknesses are, know what their interests are, and sort of be available for 24/7 tutoring, and also co-curricular stuff too. Like, you know, hey Mark, I noticed you haven't been to the gym in 3 weeks. Are you okay? Maybe you should go for a walk. So there's all sorts of opportunities there. And this actually, if you pull the thread hard enough, goes all the way back to Socrates, who was certain the best way to train a human being was through dialogue. And so now we have not been able to do that. Our dominant mode is still lecture, again, like what I'm doing right now. I'm standing up in front of you, talking to you. We can switch back to the dominant mode of instruction being dialogue. And I think our students are going to demand it, because they're going to, I mean, they are already, many of them, using the technology to do exactly this. So their patience to sit in a classroom and listen to me talk about, you know, the Graham-Schmidt orthogonalization process is going to be zero when they can get a one-on-one tutor who moves at their speed. It's precision education, personalized to them. So that frees up me from doing the heavy lifting of the didactic portion of teaching. I'm still in charge of the overall framework. I decide, okay, here are the learning outcomes, here's what we need to do, here's the path we're going to take through it, but I don't have to lecture anymore. You can have a conversation, and then you show up to class, and what we can do in class is the things the AI can't do. We can have dialogue. All of a sudden, a math class can look more like a fourth-year history class where, okay, we all did the reading, let's talk about it. What do you think? And employers rarely say, your kids aren't good enough at calculus, but they often say the soft skills are lacking. And so there's all these opportunities for integrative thinking, critical thinking, human interaction. We can do that in the classroom now. So I think being the teacher of the future is letting go of, I'm going to have a piece of chalk in hand and I'm going to walk you through step by step. You may still do that for a couple of students who want that, but letting go of that piece and focusing on all the other pieces of what it means to be an educator. So if you really liked the chalkboard lecture, the next 10 years are going to be tough for you. But if you like engaging with young minds, this is going to be amazing because it frees you up from being a performer on a stage. Very interesting perspective on classroom assessment and evaluation. Something concerns me is privacy and student work. Are there serious concerns about uploading student work to an AI tool? And that student work would now become part of a data set. Presumably students would have to agree to this, et cetera. Okay, yes, so the question is about privacy and AI tools. So I can speak to what we're doing here at Western. You, as an instructor, are the steward of the data you have in your hand. And just because something is an AI doesn't mean all of the rules we have about data security and data stewardship just disappear. You know, if you wouldn't upload it to a random cloud service, you shouldn't upload it to a random AI cloud service. So if you have student data that you want an AI's opinion on, you should not send it to ChatGPT or Claude because we do not have data sharing agreements with OpenAI or Anthropic. What you can do, and you can find this on the guidance at ai.uwo.ca, is put it into Microsoft Copilot, because our Microsoft Copilot instance has all the same guarantees and protections, technically and legally, that all of our other Microsoft products do. So the data does not leave Canada. It's in a Canadian data center. If you would be comfortable putting the student material in Outlook or on OneDrive, it is equally secure in Copilot. Copilot is unfortunately not the greatest of all the AIs, but it is safe and secure. So the answer to the question is, it is still incumbent on you as the instructor to understand, and if you don't understand, to ask your CIO or technology office, what am I allowed to share with what? If you're not sure, ask. At Western, students' IP is their own. I don't know what it is in K-12 school boards, so someone can educate me on that. But here, the students own their IP, so it would not be right for an instructor to take someone else's IP and put it into a cloud environment they have no control over. And in fact, if you're putting it into the free version of ChatGPT, the end user license agreement you click agree on essentially says, we promise we will train on this data. We're going to harvest everything, because that's the value proposition for them. Whereas when you're using the secured Copilot, we have an agreement with Microsoft. You will never train on this data. You will keep it as secure as you keep all the rest of our data. But there is still risk there. There's always risk. So it really has to be on a case-by-case basis. And I'm really happy to get that question, because it means that whoever asked that is thinking seriously about the responsibility as a steward of other people's IP, and that makes me happy.
In the vein of the same discussion there,
So the question is about the intersection of technology and truth. And the problem is that truth is difficult. You can take multiple humans randomly sampled from planet Earth, and there are questions you can ask for which they are all certain they have the truth, and all of those truths are orthogonal in some high dimensional space. And so technology doesn't solve that problem. We talk about AI alignment. We can't solve human alignment. So the actual solution is what it's always been, which is community-based. And our institutions are going to be more important than they have been in the past, because disinformation is so easy now. But for my parents' generation, if there's a picture or a video of something happening, that's real. That is ground truth reality. And we live in a world now where a picture or a video, it has as much veridicality as something someone whispered to you while you were getting your hair cut. And so we need to sort of readapt. And we've lived through that before. Newspapers existed, and some of them were good, and some of them were propaganda. And so now if I see an image on Twitter, if I have good media training, I don't believe that any more than I believe a text tweet. But if the image comes from the New York Times, I'm more inclined to believe that because their brand is dependent on me trusting them. If they lose that trust, then I'm not going to subscribe to the Times anymore. So institutions like this one, like our public schools, like solid, honest journalistic institutions are going to become more and more important in a world where truth is harder and harder to access.
Can I rebut that for a second?
Yeah.
Has anyone tried putting jurisprudence through AI to see whether judges have been right in recent times?
Yes. Yeah. There's a bunch of literature on this now, and it's interesting. So the AI has the ability to read more case law than any human can ever fit into their head. And in jurisdictions like ours that are common law jurisdictions where case law matters, which is fantastic, law is this living, breathing animal, opinion, you can have multiple conflicting opinions that both can cite lots of case law, and the AI has the ability to synthesize sort of across the whole corpus in a way that no human can. But if I'm on trial for, promoting AI after the AI Destruction Act of 2027, I want a jury of my peers, and I want a human judge. I do not want a machine. Would I be okay with the judge and the attorneys using a machine to help them sort through existing case law? They already do that, LexisNexis. So this adds another layer onto it, and I worry about what biases that layer might have. So there's lots to unpack there, but I don't see a near-term future where people are signing up to be judged by robots yet. So I think there's a human angle.
If that's all going to go away. And can you talk through the technicalities of that question?
Okay, so two questions there. The first is, or it's the second, which I'll take first, is about confabulations, so when the AI makes stuff up. And the second is about pace of technological change. And I don't drive a four-stroke, I drive a Nissan Leaf, so it's all EV. To the first, if you just look at the data going from early LLMs to the frontier models right now, the rate of confabulation continues to decrease exponentially. So it will get better. Will it ever go away? Not as long as we continue training them the way we're training right now, because the last stage of fine-tuning of these models involves human feedback. And it turns out that humans prefer to be lied to than to be told, I don't know. And like later, after being lied to, they're angry, but that's too late. They gave the reward signal to the model upon getting the lie. So they are fine-tuned and rewarded for making stuff up for park marks when they don't know the answer. So that's a flaw in how we train them. Can we fix that? Yes. And there are implementation approaches you can take, like what Perplexity does, where you force the model to ground everything it says in a reference back to some other document that a human can then check, makes it much more or less likely that it will confabulate. But the problem will always be there to some level, just as it is with humans. Humans tend to confabulate too. On the pace of technological change, I'm not Ray Kurzweil, but let's talk about transportation. You go from Bronze Age to, 18th century, and the best mode of transportation goes from being a horse-drawn vehicle to a slightly better horse-drawn vehicle. And then in the next 200 years, we go from horse-drawn vehicle to there's actually humans running around the moon. And from my vantage point, what's happening is technological change isn't happening everywhere all at once. It's not equally distributed, as Copeland would say, the way that we kind of imagine in sci-fi, 1970 sci-fi, the world of the future, everything, hinges work. So there's no incentive to get rid of hinges. We're just going to keep using hinges. But the revolution right now, I think we have machines that can do something that looks close enough to cognition that it really is a change. It's like a steam engine level change, and we're just sort of starting to grapple with it. So I do think there's a lot of change coming, but I think we have a tremendous amount of agency in how we grapple with that change. And that's why I'm having this conversation, and that's why I think it's so important, is we can make decisions that turns this into an empowering technology, or not even make decisions. We can just decline to pay attention and say, maybe this will all blow over, and let other economic interests drive an outcome that when we're living that outcome, we say, oh, geez, I wish I'd expressed my agency while I still had it. One aspect of teaching which is quite important is conversing with the situation. Since AI is mainly trained on knowledge already produced, it may not be able to assist us in new situations. Okay, so speaking to that, it is true that it is trained on old data, but it is also true that it is capable of creativity, at least as judged by humans. So we can argue about what real creativity is, and that's fine, I'll accept that. But as judged, we talked about the poetry example, as judged by professors of poetry, GPT-4, what we already have, is 99% more creative in their estimation than humans. And so AI can actually generate novel things. And if you spend a lot of time fighting with it, which I admit I do, you can have some really good debates, and it will bring up things that you never would have thought of, not because it's smarter than you, but because it knows more stuff than you. It knows sort of like imagine having a fight with Wikipedia, and if it's right in my domain of expertise, I know more than the Wikipedia page. But as soon as I'm outside of my lane, I don't know anything, and it knows way more than me, and it can find connections across areas of human knowledge that I didn't even know existed, synthesize them into the context of the conversation I'm having with it right now, and propose something to me that may not be totally novel. It's not like Picasso level genius, but it's novel enough for me to change my thinking. And so I don't see it as replacing human creativity. I see it as an incredible augment for human creativity. In a lot of ways, it's a cognitive mirror, but it's a mirror that has extra depth in terms of knowledge. So I think it can be used as a creative tool, but I completely agree with the implicit criticism there that we have to be aware that the answers, the responses it generates are going to be conditioned on the data on which it was trained, and that is a core reality.
Okay, so as we conclude this morning's online session, I just want to once again take the time to thank Mark. I know everybody here in attendance and those of us attending online have really appreciated your thought-provoking, informative, just intriguing talk. So thank you so much.